Hello guys and welcome to Barking Mad Tabletop. My name is Nick and today we have another installment in my campaign diary for Wakemare the Aftermath, my ongoing campaign in Free League Publishing's Dragonbane. Last we left off, our party had decided to head off eastward towards the neighbouring Yislik Empire to participate in a tournament in the city of Roden. And in this campaign diary we will detail the first part of the journey there, the encounters they had along the way, perhaps the beginning of a new adventure, and hopefully learn a few GMing lessons along the way. So, unfortunately, because of some external circumstances, I wasn't able to record my pre-session prep and thoughts and such, so I just have my post-session report for you today. This session started off in Goldwyn, which is the place, the trading post where they began and ended their previous adventure, which was the Horror at Havel's Cross. And if you're curious about how that went, you can check out my previous video in this series. So I start off describing a foggy, dark autumn morning, try and set the mood. Weather and mood is always helpful in doing that. And as at the end of last session they had decided to head off towards the Yislik Empire to join the tournament of Roden, I sort of outlined their journey there. It's going to be about a 2.5 week journey to get to the border between the Grand Duchy of Urseldar and the Yislik Empire, which is the Rubicana River, which, yes, is a reference to the real-life Rubicon River in Italy. So, ending my narration, I asked if there is any final business for the party to take care of here in Goldwyn, and because we had already sorted most of the shopping off-screen, if you will, in between sessions, they all said no and just wanted to get on the road immediately. I started off taking the journey day by day. I probably won't do that for the entirety of it, but I want to do it for this bit of it to try and establish some sort of rhythm to it. And because they were following a main road, specifically a pathway called the First Road, which is a road in Urseldar, in my setting, I didn't have them make bushcraft rolls to lead the way as per Dragonbane's journey rules, but when night came I did have them roll to make camp as per the rules. Now it's very unlikely that they will fail those rolls because they have a large tent, which means they get a boon, meaning roll twice and take the better result, 2 bushcraft rolls to make camp, and 1 person can help set up camp, meaning that the person making camp rolls with 2 boons, and usually that is Stumple the Druid, who has a really high bushcraft skill, so it's highly unlikely that they will fail these bushcraft rolls, but I have them roll just in case, because it could result in a fun complication in the unlikely event that they do fail. Now, for the first few days of the journey, nothing particularly dramatic or important happened. We mostly just went through the rhythm of travelling and had some nice interpersonal interactions between the player characters. During this time, we sort of established that Vassalor, the Elven Mariner, had a deep addiction to red leaf, which is my setting's version of tobacco, and he was sort of growing agitated and on edge because he did not have any red leaf. On the 3rd day of travel, I started thinking about having something more dramatic happen. I did have an adventure seeded along the way, which they were going to get to soon enough, but I thought it was time to have something more eventful, something more, well, dramatic happen. I hadn't prepared any random encounters for this go-around, rather I had 2 specific events that had specific triggers. And I was sort of wondering how I would utilize those in this situation. So to begin with, I improv'd them arriving at an abandoned village. The time period this campaign is set in is like semi-post-apocalyptic, and I describe the village as being completely empty and eerie, and that this isn't a particularly uncommon occurrence to find abandoned villages and trading posts and such on the road. So the party set about exploring this abandoned village a little. Vassalor began looking hopelessly for Redleaf, but didn't find any, and Bumble and the other player characters had some fun interactions with him about that, and as they were doing that, it gave me a bit of time to sort of think about what I wanted to do next. I settled on taking one of the events that I had originally planned to occur in another session, perhaps 3 or 4 sessions into the future, and just place it here instead. And in hindsight, I'm quite glad that I chose to do that. That's part of being a GM, is you should be and have to be flexible with where you place your prepared content. You shouldn't view your prep as being set in stone. And so as they departed the abandoned village, they heard someone around abandon the road screaming for help. We returned after a short break to where we left off, and I described again the player characters hearing someone screaming for help. I also then described other voices speaking. These ones weren't screaming, and they also weren't speaking trade speech, which is my settings take on the common language that's so sort of omnipresent in fantasy RPGs. Mikhail, who is very good at languages, which is a skill in Dragonbane actually, makes such a role and succeeds, and identifies the language spoken as being Yislik, and that they're saying things akin to "shut up and hand over your money." So the group deduces that a robbery of some sort is happening. So Sir Archibald and Bumble and Stumple rush ahead around the bend in the road, whereas Mikhail and Vassalor, in keeping with their characters being a bit more cynical, jaded, self-interested, hang back a little bit, following but not very quickly. So as Archibald, Bumble and Stumple round the bend in the road, they see a young man with sandy blonde hair and pretty fine green and blue clothing being accosted and beaten by a gang of 6 bandits. Archibald calls for them to stop with knightly authority. Basically he's trying to intimidate the Yislik bandits, and using his human ability, adaptive, he changed the skill from persuasion to swords, the idea being that he's using his imposing stature and evident skill with a blade to intimidate. He succeeds on the roll and secures a nice little debuff for him, or rather for the bandits, in the first round of combat, because subsequently we did go to initiative. I won't go into a blow-by-blow, suffice to say it was a short but fun fight. Stumple got off some cool spells, mainly ensnaring roots, which, ensnares and entangles the target. Bumble used her backstabbing ability and also threw her knife, and Archibald got to act like the big strong tank he was built to be. Once Vassalor and Mikhail joined the fight in the second round, Vassalor rushed in and did very well, but also took a lot of damage from a bandit's arrow, and meanwhile Mikhail used his higher languages and persuasion skills to actually secure the bandit's surrender. And I really like that he found a non-violent solution to the situation, or at least one that didn't continue using violence. I really like that, and I want to reward that, and I really like when players do that sort of stuff. And so he succeeded on his rolls, and he managed to secure their surrender. So that was the end of the combat, and I got to introduce the NPC who was being accosted by the bandits, a bard by the name of Silas of Tiltur. Silas is a pompous asshole, but hopefully has some rakish charm as well. I had him use an Italian accent because he is from Urseldar. And the reason Urseldar has Italy, specifically like early medieval and Renaissance Italy, as a sort of aesthetic touchstone is because of Mikhail's player. He wanted his character to be a Renaissance man, and I actually quite like the flavor of it, so it fit. And so that's another lesson for game masters, I think. So it's to let your players inspire you, both in big and little ways. I've found it quite rewarding. Anyway, I quite enjoyed playing Silas. I think most of the players enjoyed interacting with him as well, but he is meant to be a little bit of an abrasive asshole, and he is meant to rub some people the wrong way. Anyway, the party interacts a little while with Silas, and then they discuss what they're going to do with the surrendered bandits. Silas wants them executed, but the party, for I hope obvious reasons, is not feeling that. They search the bandits for valuables, and they find some silver, but not much, and then they interrogate them, upon which they find out that, yes, they are from the Yislik Empire, but they also serve someone named Trask, whom they refer to as Trask, the King of Robbers, Trask the Generous, and Trask the Valiant. And Mikhail astutely noted that these bandits seemed quite devoted for a bunch of bandits. They also note that these bandits were, as well, Yisliks, and that they are quite far away from Yislik territory, which was also a bit strange to them. And so the bandits responded that they were on a far-ranging in search of treasures to bring to Trask. After a bit of discussion and agreement, the party decided to offer the bandits a deal whereby they would be disarmed and then sent on their way, which the bandits readily accepted. This earned them some nice treasure in the form of short swords and short bows, which are quite valuable and useful, especially in this case the short bows. We don't really have a super ranged character in the party at the moment, not someone who's really spec'd into that, but with Dragonbane you can advance any skill no matter what profession or kin you are, so that can easily be accommodated now that they actually have access to a short bow. With the bandits sent on their way, the party made camp and tried to get some rest for the night. Vassalor had the watch, and this was actually the trigger for the other event that I had prepared. If you watched my previous campaign diary, you know that on watch one night, Vassalor encountered and subsequently kept a collection of very strange seeds that when he ate them, made him smarter. So this night, as the party had made camp in a cluster of trees, and Vassalor and Stumple are keeping watch around the fire, their attention is brought to a white dove that is sitting on a low branch nearby. Stumple uses a magic trick, which is a very minor spell, called Hairstyle, to fashion his hair into a literal bird's nest, and both Vassalor and Stumple are surprised when the dove compliments the said bird's nest in trade speech. This is a talking and seemingly intelligent bird. The bird introduced itself as Reginald, and I played him as having a very posh, aristocratic English accent because I thought that was funny. So Reginald and Vassalor and Stumple made a bit of small talk, and up until this point, Vassalor had been quite cagey and secretive about the seeds that he had, so I was expecting that to continue. And so my plan in preparation was that Reginald would speak to them a while longer, and eventually he would bring up the seeds, but very, very early in the conversation, in the role-playing encounter, Vassalor took out a seed and ate it, sort of bringing attention to it. And so I adjusted, and I had Reginald ask for a seed as well. Vassalor gives it to him, and once he'd eaten it, Reginald sort of turns a little sinister, and asks that Vassalor gives his friends seeds as well. And as Stumple and Vassalor look around, they see dozens more birds, all intelligent and speaking, having congregated in the patch of trees. And through tense conversations with Reginald, they find out that it appears that eating these seeds is what made these birds intelligent, and seemingly this flock of birds have been following Vassalor, knowing that he has them. So Reginald demands all the seeds from Vassalor, promising that if he gives them up, he shall remain unharmed. Vassalor characteristically refuses, and thus we go to initiative. I had prepared these birds as a monster, which has specific meaning in Dragonbane. Specifically, they were a swarm, and as it turns out, they were quite deadly. Vassalor went up and down quite a few times during the course of the battle, and others spent a few rounds getting armor and gear on as they were waking up inside the tent they all share. Silas also proved himself immensely useful by using his bard ability called Musician, which is maybe the single most powerful ability in the game, although I don't want to state that definitively just yet. I'll go into more detail about what it does probably in the Questball video, whenever that comes out. Eventually, battered, bruised, and bleeding, Vassalor surrenders the seeds, and Reginald promises that they'll be watching him in case more fall into his hands before taking off with the seeds. It was a pretty gnarly encounter, but everyone was laughing and having fun all the way through, and that's what you want in your games, and so I was very, very pleased with how it turned out. At the end of the fight, sort of the major lesson, I suppose, from this session emerged. Mikhail was quite upset with Vassalor over keeping the seeds a secret and not giving them up, thus resulting in a dangerous situation for the party. Vassalor has a very explosive temper, and thus this provocation nearly meant that the two came to blows. I do want to clarify here that while the characters were in conflict, the players were all good and civil, and there was no anger between them. All the same player versus player, or player character versus player character conflict is a complicated subject to tackle, and not everyone is comfortable with it. So I went around the table and I asked everybody present if they wanted this sort of conflict in the game, and eventually the consensus was clear that no, they didn't. This probably should have been brought up during session 0, but I didn't think of it. It hasn't come up in previous games, so it slipped my mind, and something that's probably going to happen for you as well. So at that point, it's best to just pause the game and ask everybody how they're feeling about this. Is this something they're comfortable with? And then act based on that. So I narrated that while Vassalor was close to hitting Mikhail, he eventually restrained himself and let go. Is that restraining player agency? A little bit, yeah, but I think ultimately it was for the best, and it presented an opportunity for character development for Vassalor in overcoming his central weakness, which is his temper, which I think his player was actually quite stoked about. So I think ultimately this worked out pretty well. With that out of the way, I handed the players a little note with a literal quest on it. This was something I took from one of Matt Colville's videos called Toward Better Rewards, in which he proposes a very clear and upfront rewards for things like quests and missions. It's something that I'm trying out specifically for this adventure, and if I find that it works, I'll probably keep using it. The quest in question was Resolve the Mystery of the Strange Seeds. and the reward was 2 free advancement marks for when it's resolved. So hopefully that's something they try and explore in future sessions. The next day they continue on their travels heading towards the first inhabited village on their path, which is called Simeone, which is on the outskirts of the Perdo Bosco forest, which is a place that Mikhail is aware of from his studies. The Perdo Bosco forest has a dark reputation and is believed to be one of the nexus points for the Cataclysm, which is the interdimensional semi-apocalyptic event that preceded this time period the campaign is set in. We fast-forwarded through the 2-day journey as we were heading towards the end of the night, but they arrive well after dark in Simeone, and they decide to find an inn, which they do, an establishment called the Troll's Head Inn. They enter, and as they do, the innkeeper and bartender notices Archibald in his knightly armour and attire, and says, "Priest sent for a third one, did he? Old bugger's taken to killing knights like a fish takes to water." "Pardons, my lord." This immediately catches Archibald's attention, and as he inquires further, he learns that the local priest, Sibius, who is a devotee of the Bone Matron, has previously sent for 2 other knights to do something for him, and that have since gone missing in the nearby forest, and so the bartender had assumed that this new knight was another one, and was commenting on it. So that is maybe something that Archibald will investigate next session. Could be fun. After that, we had just some mellow roleplay. Vassalor finally got his hands on some red leaf and mellowed out a little bit, and then we ended the night. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this campaign diary. I know I enjoyed making it, and also just playing the session. It was actually a really fun session. I'm already very fond of Dragonbane as a system, and of these characters, this party that we've concocted together. So with all that said, thank you for watching, keep an eye out for future videos, and peace out.